Hello friends, today I'm going to tell you about a new cool action movie called Island. Enjoy your viewing. The film begins with the band playing in a cafe on an island called Island. The owner of the cafe, named Alvarez, is completely fascinated by the vocalist of the band, Nora. He invites her to join his table and does not get tired of praising the beauty and stunning voice of Nora. His admiration reaches such limits that he offers her to perform in a cafe every Saturday for triple payment. Nora accepts his offer with admiration. Shortly after, Alvarez asks the bartender to bring some wine for Nora. However, the bartender accidentally spilled wine on her outfit. Fortunately, Nora did not get indignant and said that she could change her clothes. But Alvarez was unhappy with this situation. He was expecting an important guest and didn't want anyone to see Nora in a soiled outfit. Then he brutally kills the bartender right in front of Nora. This terrifies Nora, and she realizes that Alvarez is a dangerous man. It turned out that Alvarez heads an influential mafia group in the United States. He has been living on the island for 4 years, expanding his illegal activities. Then we are shown a scene in Los Angeles. Our main characters are the police chief, Mark, and his deputy, Phil. At that time, they were undercover under the guise of criminals, planning to make dubious deals at the airport. Soon after, the real dealer and his buddy show up. Mark approaches the dealer to pick up the illegal goods, while Phil is preparing to give the money. Suddenly, Phil attacks the dealer's friend and puts up a big fight. Then Mark gets a call from his mom from their hometown. She tells him that his brother has been found dead. Upon hearing this terrible news, Mark immediately goes to his hometown, which is located on the island. In the blink of an eye, Mark appears and attends his brother's funeral. He finds out that his younger brother was a bartender who was killed by Alvarez the other day. Mark's mom is devastated by the tragic event of losing her youngest child. Rumor has it that gangsters may have killed Mark's brother as he was returning home from work. Even Alvarez and 2 of his henchmen show up at the funeral to express their condolences to Mark. As soon as the funeral is over, Mark and his mom return home. At this time, he is looking through his old photos with his brother. He realizes that it has been 11 years since he was last on the island. His police duties kept him on the sidelines. He swears to himself that he will take revenge on the man who killed his brother. The next day, Mark went to the island's police station. He went straight to the chief of police, who turned out to be his childhood friend, B. They were obviously well acquainted. B expressed his condolences in connection with the death of his younger brother Mark and promised to launch a prompt investigation of the case. Mark asked if B had any leads on the case. At the time, B said they only knew that the killers were gangsters. Figuring out which gang is responsible will take time due to the large number of gangs on the island. While there, Mark ran into Akila, a female martial arts coach. Interestingly, she was his ex-girlfriend. She was obviously glad to see him after 11 long years. At that time, they met, and Akila expressed their condolences on the death of brother Mark. Mark asked her about his brother's habits and which gang could be involved in this. Akila mentioned that she wasn't sure about the gangs, as many of them arrived after Mark left the island. However, she knew that his younger brother had contacted an American named Alvarez. It turned out that Alvarez was actually a mafia boss. The cafes he owned were just a front, and his real business was dealing in illegal goods and weapons. After learning this, Mark began to suspect Alvarez and decided to meet him face to face. Before leaving, Mark asked Akila to take care of his mother and bring her home, fearing for her safety. Soon after, Mark went to Alvarez's cafe. However, he was first stopped by Alvarez's right-hand man, and then allowed Mark to enter. Mark wasted no time in asking Alvarez if he knew who was responsible for his brother's death. At this point, Alvarez lied, claiming that Mark's brother was killed by outsiders while returning from a night shift. Mark was not convinced and warned Alvarez that he would never forgive him if he was involved in this crime. Alvarez responded with a laugh, dismissing Mark's threats, especially since he was an ordinary policeman. Alvarez then informed Mark of the location of a cafe where gangsters were often present. He suggested that Mark ask the gangsters there, because they might know who was behind the death of Mark's brother. After Mark left Alvarez, he ordered his right hand to gather gangsters from the north to eliminate Mark. Meanwhile, Mark paid a visit to his best friend, who had a hot dog stand. He asked about some kind of weapon that he had left with his friend. His friend explained that he hid the weapon in an empty building near the beach. It then becomes clear that when Mark and his best friend were teenagers, they were leaders on the island. But after he left for Los Angeles, the island began to attract foreign gangs and the mafia. Mark's best friend understood that Mark would avenge his brother's death, so he was ready to help Mark whenever he needed it. After that, Mark went to an abandoned building near the beach and dug up a weapon that his best friend had buried. When evening came, Mark came to the cafe that Alvarez had mentioned. He quickly turned off the music and told the gangsters about his brother's killer. However, they did not take kindly to his accusations and attacked him, which led to a scuffle. Surprisingly, Mark skillfully coped with them, and the gangsters were subdued. Mark once again asked who was behind the murder of his brother. The gang leader categorically denied any involvement in harming local residents. Suddenly, a group of gangsters from the north, acting on Alvarez's orders, broke in and started shooting at Mark. Fortunately, he narrowly escaped the shooting, which led to a frantic chase. During the chase, Mark managed to immobilize one of the pursuers. Eventually, he found a hiding place, eluding the gangsters until they lost sight of him. Shortly after, the gang leader contacted Alvarez to report that they had lost sight of Mark. This news angered Alvarez, prompting him to order his gang to eliminate Mark's mother. Soon after, they arrived at Mark's house and broke in, but found no one there. Aquila, Mark's ex-girlfriend, took precautions to protect Mark's mother. Later, we see Mark and B, the chief of police, who are examining the crime scene at Mark's house. At the time, Mark couldn't help but think that if he hadn't entrusted his mother to Aquila, she might have become a victim. B then informs Mark that he has just received information about his brother's murder. As it turned out, he had a witness, a singer named Nora. B then reveals that Nora lives in a motel near the church in room number 18. He suggests that Mark could talk to Nora directly to find out more about his brother's killer. The next day, we see Mark heading to Nora's room. At first, Nora hesitates to open the door, worried that Mark might be one of Alvarez's people. After Mark shows his police badge, Nora finally opens the door and they start talking. Mark promises to help Nora safely leave the island if she agrees to reveal who really killed the bartender, who was Mark's younger brother. Nervous, Nora says that Alvarez killed Mark's brother only because he accidentally spilled wine on her dress. She says that she was trapped on the island because Alvarez is afraid that she could report to the police. After learning this shocking truth, Mark quickly takes Nora out of her room. Then he meets with B. Mark asks him to escort Nora to the dock and make sure she leaves the island without any problems. Finally, he takes Nora to the pier, while Mark begins to plot his revenge on Alvarez for his brother's death. Now the story turns to Alvarez, who orders his trusted mercenaries to track down Mark. A couple of hours later, the mercenaries arrive on the island and head straight to Mark's house. Meanwhile, Mark, his mother, and Aquila are together in his house. Mark plans to leave his mother with Aquila as he prepares for a confrontation with Alvarez. Suddenly, Alvarez's mercenaries drive up to the house. Mark quickly grabs the weapon and directs his mother and Aquila to safety. 2 mercenaries remain at the car, while the other 2 continue to move towards the house. Upon entering the house, they realize that Mark has already escaped. During the pursuit, 2 mercenaries catch up with Mark and start a shootout. Meanwhile, 2 other mercenaries guarding the car encounter B. Suddenly, a shootout ensues, but soon B manages to drive them away. At this time, Mark killed one of the mercenaries, while the other mercenary was running away. B then contacts him to find out his whereabouts. Mark replies that he is currently guarding his mother and Aquila at the house of his best friend, who sells hot dogs. Next, we are shown Alvarez, who is in the hotel in search of a hole. Upon discovering Nora's absence, Alvarez becomes enraged and immediately kills the hotel security guard for failing to protect her. At this time, Mark comes to his best friend. He quickly leaves his mother and Aquila there, as he is determined to avenge his brother's death. The hot dog vendor warmly greets Mark's mother and Aquila. However, when Mark is about to leave, Aquila insists on joining him. At this time, Mark tries to dissuade her, but she persists, and eventually they decide to accept the challenge together. In the evening, Mark and Aquila are waiting for the arrival of the B police chief. Tonight, they have developed a plan to fight together with Alvarez. Soon B arrives in his car, but he doesn't get out of it. Worried, Mark and Aquila check the car and discover that he is seriously injured. Suddenly, gunfire is heard, and this is an attack by the 3 remaining defenders of Alvarez. In the confusion, the mercenaries manage to capture Aquila, while Mark does everything possible to help the dying B. Before passing away, Bay urges Mark to continue fighting for justice and save the islands from ruthless people like Alvarez. The next day, local residents gathered in the church. Soon after, Mark appears and urges people to unite to resist oppression by gangsters. He rallies all the people to stand up to Alvarez together. This time, not only Mark's brother suffered at the hands of Alvarez, but also the B police chief and the kidnapped Aquila. After learning about this, the residents agreed to join forces and oppose Alvarez. After that, Mark went to the police station, temporarily replacing B. He gathered his fellow officers to focus on their new target, and that was Alvarez. Then Phil, his LAPD partner, showed up. Phil specifically came to find Mark and find out why he is not returning to Los Angeles. Mark explained that he would not return until he dealt with Alvarez, who had killed his brother and held Aquila hostage. Phil took Mark's problem as his own and agreed to help. Later in the afternoon, Alvarez contacted Mark. He found out that Mark was behind Nora's escape. He offered to meet at 7 a.m. the next day to exchange Nora for Aquila. Alvarez promised to leave Mark alone after this exchange if Mark agreed to forget everything he had done. Mark reluctantly agreed. He knew that he would not be able to forgive Alvarez until he took revenge on him. Bessie D's, Nora had already left the island. Mark then contacted Phil and asked him to put together a team with the local police. This time, he appointed Phil as the leader to save Aquila from Alvarez during their scheduled meeting. Upon hearing this, Phil agreed to follow these instructions. The next day, Mark came to the designated place to meet with Alvarez. Meanwhile, Phil and his police team were trying to infiltrate Alvarez's headquarters to free Aquila. Soon, they ran into one of Alvarez's mercenaries, but Phil managed to eliminate the threat. Returning to Mark, he found himself face-to-face with Alvarez and one of his assistants. Alvarez wasted no time in inquiring about Nora's whereabouts. Mark lied and said that Nora would appear as soon as Aquila arrived. He continued to stall for time and waited for news from Phil, who in the meantime was saving Aquila. Phil found Aquila, but was confronted by a mercenary who held him at gunpoint. At that time, his options were limited, and he gave up. Fortunately, they managed to eliminate the mercenaries. Phil then quickly informed Mark that Aquila was safe. Upon hearing this, Mark said that Nora was safe in Los Angeles and would not return to the island. Alvarez also threatened to harm Aquila if Mark didn't comply. Mark stated that Alvarez's henchmen no longer pose a threat because they have been taken care of. An enraged Alvarez ordered his assistant to shoot Mark. However, he quickly neutralized Alvarez's assistant. Then the unexpected happened, and local residents appeared with weapons in their hands. Mark urged everyone to put down their weapons, suggesting a duel between him and Alvarez to settle everything once and for all. Alvarez reluctantly agreed to the challenge. Soon after the duel began, Mark finally avenged his brother and killed the scoundrel. Later, Mark and Aquila spend time together on the beach. They have become a couple again and are planning to get married. Shortly after Phil invited Mark to return to Los Angeles, Mark refused and stayed to defend the island. At this point, the film ends. Thanks for watching.